Okay. So I'm here tonight with Charlie Mostow, who's a figurative sculptor. We go pretty far back. How many years?
Well, I came to GCA in 2000, fall of 2012, so almost 8 years.
I guess we've been working respectively in sculpture for about the same amount of time. Would you want to introduce yourself and sort of what you've been doing, or give us a brief
With a
history?
little bio.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm Charlie. Thanks, Zoe. Thank you, Saint-Gaudens Memorial Site. I'm excited, to have the opportunity to be here because, um, like you said, we went to school together, and it's just kind of an amazing moment. I think for me, I want to take a second to just recognize it for us to say, like, to be sculptors who, when we met, were untrained, and then to be here sort of representing and speaking in the same crowd, in the same house as St. Gaudens is like super exciting for me. So I'm happy to be here. So
Yes.
um, I grew up in Seattle and always, was interested in art. And then I'm just going to try to do a brief summary. Um, and then I started doing drawing classes in college, and I was introduced to the GCA through the Grand Central Atelier, is where Zoe and I trained,
Mhm.
through a teacher in college, and simultaneously a friend of mine in Seattle went to another atelier, the Aristides Atelier. And so I was introduced to the atelier world at that time, and then it took me 4 years graduating college to then uh, like really pursue the education for myself. So after I graduated college, I came to New York and went to GCA, and then started sculpting in clay only then. I was interested in drawing and painting, and then was introduced to sculpture there with our teacher Che and a few other people who came through the studio,
Mhm.
and then it's kind of hard because the story, but
Yeah.
it's.
Yeah, it's weird to reiterate. I forgot that you weren't originally intending on becoming a sculptor.
Did
Um,
you? Yeah, I mean, I was I was really interested in drawing from life was like the key. And then I started to like landscape painting as well, and just being outside and drawing out and painting outside before I came to GCA. So I was thinking, oh, I'll go to GCA and just study the figure and study working from life. And but then slowly but surely the sculpture, like, uh, God just took over. you know. Uh, did you go to GCA with sculpture in mind?
no, I that's why I commented on that, because I feel like I was also an accidental sculptor.
Yeah,
I didn't plan on becoming a sculptor, and then sort of like you, where I started sculpting and then just slowly became more and more enmeshed
yeah,
in sculpting until that was all I was doing.
yeah, exactly. So I share the same kind of experience because there's something like so engaging about it when you're learning, well, when I was learning to draw from life, and then people would say, no, make your drawing like a sculpture. Just put yourself on the form inside of that paper and imagine yourself on the surface of that object in your drawing.
Yeah.
And then they would send us every Friday to the sculpture studio and say, well, this is a little bit of practice. This is what your drawing should feel like. And then I would just go back to my drawing and say, like, why am I making this illusion? Why am I not just making the thing? So then, yeah, slowly, like, my interest just switched like this. It was like at a certain point, I was drawing all the time, sculpting 1 day a week, and then sculpting and drawing half and half. And then by, I don't know, 2 years, then I was sculpting all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel, well, I just read something really interesting. Um, it's a writer. His name is David Abrams, but he writes mostly on like environment actually. But he has this section of one of his books just about depth, which was so beautiful. Um, and I'm gonna butcher what he said, but he talked about how basically when we're looking at something on a flat surface, there's this static relationship to like height and width, which doesn't change. But when we're dealing with depth, it's this immersive dimension that shifts as we move in it and through it, and is really the only one that we can alter our perception of depth depending on where we are and how we engage with it. If that makes sense. Where if you were looking at, maybe this is a clear analogy, if you're looking at like a relief sculpture of a lion on a prairie.
Okay. Got it.
And you moved around that sculpture, the relationships would change between like the lion and like the trees on the savanna or whatever. And you would be shifting your experience of what you were seeing. But if you were to look at that same thing on the television screen, no matter where you moved around the screen, it would stay exactly the same.
Yeah.
And so with sculpture, there's this really immersive kind of engagement, whether you're making it or doing it, which I think was so appealing to me.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. The space, just being in space already was interesting. I think that's what I liked about landscape painting is like you would sit down, and the minute you started to try to like take what was in front of you and put it on the canvas, because it's such a depth of space out there, it like just makes you so hyper aware of all of that dimension. And then sculpture, even though you're creating an object, it's kind of the opposite thing, in that you're making the object instead of the negative space. And I guess, well, that's interesting. That could be a whole tangent, because if you're doing a landscape painting, are you painting? I actually always thought of it as sort of painting the negative space, like feeling that negative space, instead of painting the object in that space. But that's really interesting. Maybe I should go back to landscape painting because I had it all wrong. No, but I guess it's the same kind of feeling, like what you're saying, just a sense of depth and playing around with that. Yeah. It's so interesting. I mean, so that's 8 years that, I at least have had like the conversation and the doors like really opened up to me to start to think about that kind of stuff. And it's like still super engaging, we could sit here and like keep going and it could just snowball. So it's kind of amazing. So if I may, because I'm jumping ahead in my mind before I tell everyone the rest of my story, because I'm now working at Sabin Howard's studio and we're making this World War I memorial, and I'm like jumping into how we're working, which is a mix of drawing and sculpting and design all at once. Is fun.
I'm actually super curious when you mentioned talking about the connection between drawing and sculpting, I figured Sabin is probably like one of the sculptors who I feel like is connecting both of those disciplines the most. But I wanted you to maybe for those of you who don't know who Sabin Howard is, he's an incredibly talented and prolific figure sculptor that's working, you know better, but he's working on one of the, I think, biggest sculptural monuments that's been commissioned in years.
There's a giant qualifying statement that they say something like the largest freestanding bronze bas-relief in the Western Hemisphere, something like that.
That's pretty amazing. Yeah,
it's a 38 figure will be in bronze, figurative relief depicting a story from World War One, essentially, and it'll be in Washington D.C.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And then, I mean, that actually is crazy. For some reason, I thought it was 27 figures, but 38, that's
30,
massive.
it's 60 feet long. So
Yeah.
the figures, the fact that it's a relief means like you are sort of describing with the lion relief image that there's a certain kind of compression in space and stretching of the proportion of the figures across the relief. So some of the figures are bigger than life size, the ones that are in the foreground, and then some of them are smaller, the ones that are in the back. So it's hard to say. Are the figures bigger or smaller? Like, is it? Yeah, they vary, but it's a big figurative sculpture project. That's for sure.
It looks incredible, and I feel like what he's done is so hard to do because it's a really high relief.
Mm-hmm.
But to effectively grid and perspective how the figures need to relate to each other and scale to be convincing. I mean, that's all drawing, but the four figures are actually, I'm really curious about this. Are all the figures sculpted in the round, or some of them slightly compressed?
No, a lot of them are compressed, even in some way. It's definitely an interesting scheme in terms of the relief. It's one of these situations where I would say he learned the rules to break them all. Like,
Yeah.
when I was studying relief at GCA and really trying to be active about it, I would have said, oh, based on the law of perspective, like there would be a diminishing rate of the scale of the figure as they go back, and try to plot it out. And that's really not the case here. I think, there's a lot of different ways of like describing depth by just simple overlap or change in scale, and so it's definitely more of like a free form relief. Like, so you asked how many of the figures are completely in the round? I don't know, actually, off the top of my head. We haven't gotten all the way through yet.
Yeah.
But I would say like maybe a third of them, or probably more like a quarter of them, 10 out of 38 are fully in the round. And then there's other figures that are sort of supporting them, I would say, and start to like step the space back. But then there's also cases where like this certain figure that I'm working on, from the front view, looks totally in the round, and he's on the most projecting part of the relief. He's like crouching down, and he's about to charge forward. And the front half of him, the front half would being the closest to the viewer, because he's perpendicular. Well, he's charging across the relief like this. So
Yeah.
the front half of his body is in the round, and then he actually starts to compress. So the rule of the relief doesn't apply just to him as a whole. He's actually changing in relief as he goes back.
Mm-hmm. Are you judging that sort of intuitively, or is Saban judging that intuitively, or?
It's a constant conversation, actually, and yeah, it's a certain amount of intuition, but Saban's the ultimate judge, and it's hard to call it intuition at this point because he's got so much experience. It's just built up experience, I would say.
Yeah.
But it goes back to drawing, because it's got to read from the primary view. It's got to just look good from the primary view. And so what I found is we kind of get into situations where there's a given depth that we have to work in, and you can play around within that depth. And so we're making those decisions still. It's not fixed. And that's one of the exciting things about working at that studio, is that we're working with live models. So, yeah, you get to use your intuition, as you put it, every day to translate what you see on the model and then figure out how to fit it in that space that you're kind of given.